On a weekly basis, you and Jerry were lucky enough to have a real sports talk legend. And in a way, this guy was really an NFL legend, Joel Buchsbaum. Joel, really the original NFL draft guru, a great all-time character, a huge reason why the draft is as big as it is today. Tell me if I have the story right. Jerry had worked with Joel at KMOX Radio in St. Louis and then hired Joel when he came to KTRH. Did I get that right?
You have the premise right, yes. Joel was a guest for the folks at KMOX where Jerry first started before he came to Houston, and because of that association, he was able to develop him here into Houston. But Joel was based in Brooklyn, New York. He was right in the heart of Flatbush, and that's where he came to us from every week when we talked to him, and you could tell it by the way he talked, but there was nobody, absolutely nobody, who knew more about football than Joel did. He had... His apartment was a bed, a television, and huge bookcases that had reams and reams of media guides and reams of tape that teams would send to him so he could evaluate the players and get his knowledge. And for the longest time, almost to the very end, Joel would submit his columns for Pro Football Weekly in longhand. He did not own a computer. He did it all from the top of his head. When you asked the question, it came right from his brain, and he wrote his columns in longhand, and finally Pro Football Weekly bought him a computer so he could type his columns and email them to them. Otherwise, they were written in longhand and shipped overnight by FedEx so they could appear in the weekly print edition of Pro Football Weekly. So that's, but he was, you could not stump him, whether it was a big school or a small Division II school. If somebody had a prospect, Joel knew about it. He knew his height, he knew his weight, he knew his 40 time, and he knew a bunch of other things about the guy too, and whether or not he could make it in the National Football League. And of all the years that I've worked in radio, I don't know that there's been a bigger character or a bigger memory pusher than Joel Buchsbaum, because once you heard the guy, you could not forget him. And you compare him today to all these other guys, and there are some very good guys out there, Mike Mayock and Mel Kiper and the whole lot of them. There are a lot of guys who study it, but I dare say that nobody ever comes close to what Joel knew about football personnel.
And just so people know, Joel was so well respected that Bill Belichich would call him before the draft and go over his draft board and then make changes on what Joel had to say. I wanted to ask you, one of my favorite quotes from Joel was, looks like Tarzan, plays like Jane. Do you have any particular favorite quotes or callers or just kind of moments with doing the show with him?
For one of the years, Joel would do the opposing team's preview for us in the pregame show that I hosted. And he would run down, every starter on the offense, every starter on the defense. And I won't mention the player or the team, but he was an outside linebacker, is all I would tell you. And he said, he 6'3", 245, runs 4'5", thinks 5'2". And you knew exactly what he meant. Great athlete, but did not have football intelligence. And the other one that pops to mind besides the play like looks like Tarzan, plays like Jane, is Reggie Collier was a highly touted college quarterback and went to the USFL out of college. The Dallas Cowboys held their rights to Collier, and when the USFL folded, Collier went over and was a third-string quarterback behind Danny White, and I forget who White's backup was, but it was late in the season. The Cowboys were not doing very well, and somebody called in and asked what were the odds of Collier getting some playing time since the Cowboys had no playoff aspirations. And Joel's response was, Tom Landry won't play him because the last films that Reggie saw was Bugs Bunny. Which obviously meant that Reggie didn't do any off-the-field work to get ready for a game, so Landry wasn't about to put him in a ball game. So those are the two most memorable ones that come out for me.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.